Okay, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. I wanted to thank you for joining us today for the next installment of our webinar series. My name is Chris Costani. I'm an account manager at Happier IT, and I will be moderating today's session. I'm being joined by Marcus Peel, who will be presenting today's webinar, How Cybercriminals Are Targeting Your Small, Medium-Sized Business and How We Can Help Protect Your Business. Just some quick housekeeping items before we start here. We encourage all of you to comment in the chat section. That'll be located at the bottom right of your page. We will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your questions, fear not, we will send you a personalized response after the presentation is finished. We will also be sending out a YouTube link to the webinar and a note package so that you can watch it after the presentation. We also know that there were some of you that had issues getting into the webinar today. I do apologize for that. We will make sure to get that YouTube link out to you guys as well so that you can view it at a later time. So let's get started on today's topic. At any moment, day or night, your organization can be victimized by devastating cybercrime. You can't predict when cyber attacks will happen, but you can use proactive incident response to quickly mitigate its effects or prevent them altogether. There is really no business or industry that is safe from cyber attacks. That is why IBM chairman Ginni Rometty once stated that cybercrime is the greatest threat to every company in the world. There's a lot for SMBs to worry about, such as what if your business couldn't recover from the lost money, information, or reputation? The purpose of this webinar is to help you become better informed of common cybersecurity issues for small businesses and methods and systems you can use to improve your security posture and reduce your risk of being victimized. With that said, I'm going to pass this off to Marcus Peel, who's going to have a ton more information for you. Marcus?
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So just to add a little bit to that, we've definitely seen a huge jump in cyber threats over the past little while, especially in 2020, now that there's, a lot more users working from home and our focus has been put elsewhere. So we really don't want to see any of our clients falling victim to this, which is why we chose this specific topic for our webinar today. There's just a lot of quick solutions and things that we think you guys could be doing that could have a big impact in protecting our data. Some of these things might include, a stronger password policy or implementing two-factor authentication, or just simple things like user education. Keep in mind, increasing your security posture doesn't always come with a price. So with that being said, today we'll be focusing on how cyber criminals are targeting your business and then how we can help protect you. So some of the topics throughout today's webinar will include things such as why cyber criminals like targeting small and medium-sized businesses. I'll talk a little bit about the most common types of threats that we're seeing today. And then I'll go into why cybersecurity should be an essential part of your business. And then lastly, I'll talk about, how we can protect ourselves against these common threats that we'll be discussing. All right, so why do cybercriminals like targeting small and medium-sized businesses so much? And why are we seeing so many threat attempts lately? To answer that, we really need to take a look at who these cybercriminals are. So essentially, any individual is easily capable of launching effective cyber attacks. All it takes nowadays is a few dollars on the dark web, and we can start trying to exploit businesses. We're seeing everyone and anyone when it comes to these threat attempts, even people like students. The dark web marketplace makes it easy for individuals to buy and sell stolen information. These marketplaces operate a lot like Amazon and eBay, but for things like stolen credit cards, banking information, Office 365 credentials, infected PCs, and a lot more. So these aren't the only types of criminals after your business. In fact, now that cybercrime has become increasingly more lucrative, it's common to see overseas criminal organizations as well, with hundreds of staff. So these organizations are a lot more dangerous, and they're equipped with very sophisticated tools and information that make it very easy for them to discover and then exploit businesses that don't have a lot of cybersecurity in place. So back to why cyber criminals target small and medium-sized businesses. Well, the answer is pretty simple. There's just a lot of success in that marketplace. They're making a lot of money. Statistically, SMBs are just not investing enough into cybersecurity. All right, so before we get into our next section here, which is the most common types of cybercrime, we're going to throw up a quick poll for you guys. Chris, do you want to kick that off?
Absolutely. So we just have a quick poll, like Marcus had mentioned, for you guys. And it is titled, "How confident are you in your organization's overall security posture?" Very confident, moderately confident, slightly confident, not confident at all. Let us know. We're going to continue on here with the presentation, and we'll get to your answers later. But a quick question, Marcus, because this comes up often. We get a lot of our clients asking about this, and we as a company also get these. And I know you're going to speak into more detail later, but how can I tell if a sender is safe in my inbox?
Yeah, so I'll jump into that a bit later in the presentation, but when we get into like email security and things like that, but you're going to be looking at things like the sender address. There might be links that look a bit deceiving that you have to hover over to see where they actually redirect you to, things like that we can kind of take a look at. But I'll be exploring that type of stuff throughout this presentation.
Excellent. Let's continue on, sir.
All right, sounds good. So let's talk about the most common types of cybercrime. So the most common by far is holding data for ransom. We'll talk about how this works later in the webinar, but it's important to note how big of a threat this is to your organization. We're seeing huge increases in the number of cases per year, and the payouts for this are becoming too big for businesses to handle. So the next type of cybercrime that's very common is imposter scams. So how this works is a criminal will gain access to one of your corporate email accounts, typically by purchasing the credentials off the dark web. Next, they'll set up things such as, maybe like fraudulent accounts receivable scams. So the way that would work is they would first set up some type of mail forwarding rule on their compromised account to understand how you're interacting with your clients. Then once they've gained a bit of that insider knowledge, they'll use the compromised account to then send out things like false invoices or, false statements to your clients to siphon payments. And that sort of thing can go on for months without being discovered because it kind of just runs in the background. So commonly as well, we're seeing imposter scams in the forms of executive wire transfers. So essentially, again, using a compromised account to gain access and siphon money internally, typically by impersonating a staff member in your finance department. And surprisingly, this actually has a very high success rate. Not a lot of businesses have a ton of protocol around, ensuring that these are legitimate emails. Lastly, one of the most common types of cybercrime is the actual buying and selling of your information. So as I mentioned, it's incredibly easy and profitable to buy and sell stolen information on the dark web, which is why it's so common to see organizations fall victim to cyber attacks nowadays. My point here is that, we need to keep our corporate information safe. We all house sensitive information, whether it's, trade secrets, client or patient information, intellectual property, all that type of stuff. All right, now let's talk about some of the more common types of cyber attacks that criminals usually use to obtain information from your businesses. So the most common cyber attack of all time is phishing. For those of you that aren't familiar with what this is, essentially it's just an email scam that presents the user with some form of trickery. Maybe it looks like a free Amazon gift card, or in most cases, an email from Microsoft asking for your credentials or for you to log in. These emails will often contain as well like malicious content in the form of potentially an attachment, or it might try and bait the user into clicking some sort of link that will then take them to a malicious website. But basically the intent here is to either get the user to download something to their machine or have the user voluntarily type in some sort of sensitive information online so they can later exploit that. Now, this might not sound like something that your users will fall victim to, but I can guarantee you that, without any user education in place, at least one of your users will fall victim to this, probably this year. So I think that user education, when we're talking about cybersecurity, is increasingly important. All right, so the next type of cyber attack that I'll talk about is called hacking. So what this means is that someone is attempting a targeted attack on your organization systems. So often these types of attacks are the most dangerous because criminals will gain access to critical systems or servers, backend infrastructure, things like that, and gain a lot of your corporate information all at once. So typically the successful attacks here are due to vulnerabilities such as like outdated operating systems, old software that you might use, weak system passwords, that type of thing. The most important thing to note with hacking is that we can greatly mitigate these threats by ensuring our systems are patched and that we have proper Active Directory settings enabled, such as strong passwords, lockout timers, password expiries, just general best practice settings in place. So let's talk a little bit about spyware. So spyware is often a gateway threat for much more dangerous activity within your organization. So the way that we get spyware on our machines commonly is through things such as successful phishing attempts where we're downloading malicious code through an email attachment or website, as we had spoke about recently. So the danger with spyware is that it often goes undetected from your antivirus. So this means that we don't really know if machines have it, and it can be slowly stealing information such as credentials, or in some cases, even more sensitive information like social security numbers, credit card information, medical records, that type of thing. So spyware has a really long dwell time, meaning it's often not discovered until some sort of manual scan or investigation takes place. So some of you might be wondering, how do we deal with this? Our antiviruses aren't going to catch it. Don't worry, later in the webinar, I'll review, what solutions we can put in place to help mitigate some of this stuff. So the next type of common threat I'll talk about is called zombie malware. Now, again, this is often distributed through things like phishing attempts, through like email attachments, malicious websites, that sort of thing. So much like spyware, this as well often doesn't get detected by antivirus. So what this particular threat will do is it'll start to do things on the user's behalf. So some very common cases of this are, sending emails through the user's Outlook, but more commonly, it'll do something called crypto mining, which can have really big performance impacts on your network and also on the machine that it's taking place on, making it hard for users to kind of interact with your systems and work. All right, so let's talk about the last type of cyber attack, which is ransomware. So we talked a little bit about this earlier in the webinar and its importance. I had mentioned that ransomware is the #1 most successful threat by far. So the way this works is, again, commonly distributed through phishing attempts, things like email attachments, bad websites. Once the ransomware is ran from a machine, it'll encrypt all of the files that user has access to. So once the files are encrypted, they're no longer usable, and a message will often pop up on your screen stating, some information on how you can pay a fee to then unencrypt those files. So the fees are usually very high, and there's no guarantee that after you pay, the files will even unlock. Like, imagine paying $100,000 and then nothing happens. Like that's actually a common scenario that a lot of businesses face. So you guys might be wondering, can we just recover from backups? Definitely in some cases we can, but we're starting to see more sophisticated attacks where these successful ransomware attempts will actually corrupt or delete standard backups, making it impossible to recover for them, meaning the only way to get your files back is to pay the ransom. So again, later in the webinar, I'll go through, in more detail how to mitigate these threats from happening. All right, now before we jump into this next section here, let's take a look at the poll results from earlier.
Yeah, so Marcus, it's actually quite interesting. I'm just going to give people a few more seconds, just in case they haven't had a chance to. But we do have a question from Aaron, whose company, obviously, it looks like they use Sophos as their antivirus. And it's a really good question because I think it does apply to a lot of different antivirus software and solutions as well. And his question was, why is spyware harder to find for Sophos than viruses?
Yeah, so typical viruses that we're looking for when it comes to standard endpoint protection are signature based. So a lot of the time, spyware has dynamic signatures, or it goes undetected in the system. Oftentimes, the way that we find that type of malware is using a specific technology that I'll talk about a little bit later in the webinar that uses machine learning, AI, that type of thing. That's definitely not the standard antivirus type technology.
Good. So I've just shared the poll results, and it's great to see that there's confidence in their organization's overall security for the most part. There's a couple of slightly confident, but definitely, Marcus, it seems like it's landed in the middle more than anything.
Yeah, good to see that no one selected not confident at all. But yeah, you're right. It looks like we've landed somewhere in the middle there. The reason that we wanted to propose this question is because we want to find the actual answer for you guys. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a security scorecard for all of our clients that have attended the webinar today. So I'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation, but essentially the scorecard is going to have information like, which vulnerabilities are present in your current environment, what our recommendations are to kind of counteract those vulnerabilities, that type of thing. So just a bit of transparency around security in general for your organizations.
Perfect. And just before I finish and close the poll here, Marcus, one last question. From your experience, what is the most common threat that you see businesses experiencing?
Yeah, definitely the phishing ransomware combo. That one's definitely hit a lot of, not necessarily just our clients, but the industries in general, due to things like lack of, user education. We can have systems in place that help mitigate threats like that. But if users are clicking bad links and typing in their credentials and leaking credentials through, fake logins, things like that, it can often spawn ransomware later in time and set things up like that. So, yeah, we'll definitely get into that later in the presentation. But yeah, I would say phishing and ransomware is the most common that we've seen.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's. Again, we encourage questions throughout. So please keep going. Those are wonderful. So Marcus, yeah, let's keep going.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about, why cybersecurity is critical to your business. So to understand that, we really need to take a look at the likelihood of a cyber attack happening or successfully happening. So based on the numbers in Canada, 1 out of 5 SMBs were affected by a cyber attack or major data breach in the last 2 years. And as we had discussed previously as well, these numbers are increasing quite fast. So we might be looking at, maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 3 SMBs this year, possibly. So hopefully that's enough to motivate you guys to at least have, a further conversation with us to, try and properly equip your business with the right cybersecurity. All right, now that we know, sort of the likelihood of a successful cyber attack, let's talk about the impact. So cyber attacks can definitely vary in how damaging they are to your organization, but on average, we're seeing major business disruption and in a lot of cases, reputational damage. So once someone has successfully exploited a business, they often don't stop. Once they're in, they now understand, a lot better how your organization's set up, and repeat attacks are often common and very hard to mitigate because they leave, things within the system to get back in. So due to this, a statistic here, about 60% of small companies close within 6 months of a major breach. All right, now before I get into all the kind of cybersecurity measures and tools and stuff like that that can help mitigate these attacks, I want to quickly talk about cybersecurity frameworks and standards. So when it comes to cybersecurity, Happy RT is not coming up with necessarily our own strategies from scratch or trying to crack the code on how to solve cybercrime. We spend a lot of our time focusing and understanding the global cybersecurity frameworks that are out there and used at every level of business around the world. So we're constantly working with our expert security partners as well to ensure that the solutions that we're trying to deliver are industry-leading solutions. Some of you in this webinar, might belong to an organization as well that requires compliance assessments. That's also something that we can offer, and I do urge you to take advantage of that. Just contact your account rep after the webinar if that's something you want to explore. All right, so the last section of the webinar is all about, what are the common tools or solutions that we'd be recommending to help protect against some of these threats that we've been talking about so far. So before I get into the specifics here, I will mention that, there's no one security package or set of security products that fit all businesses. Every organization's security landscape looks very different. And to do our job properly, we need to determine the right strategy that's specific to your unique organization. So as I may have already mentioned, we want to kick this off by creating a scorecard specific to each of our clients. So the scorecard is going to have a lot of transparency around where you might be potentially vulnerable, what solutions we would recommend, and much more. All right, so now we can kind of jump into the different types of threats that we're facing and how we can protect ourselves against them. So with phishing being the most common way of entrance into our organization, this definitely should be the first major area of security that we explore. So some of the top recommendations that we've put together include things such as Microsoft 365's new anti-phishing policy. So it was actually released June 2020, so this month. The product is free for anyone that has an Office 365 license, and it's quite useful for adding, just an extra layer of security there against any type of phishing attempt. So having said that, just simply using this one policy is not nearly enough. The best thing that we can do to mitigate this type of threat is educate our staff. So we do this through security awareness training. So this type of solution will provide users with education and training, and then simulations and testing, which can then be analyzed using different metrics. So it'll help you understand, who your at-risk staff members are, so that you can focus on them and maybe provide them with more training, that sort of thing. And Chris, just to jump back to your previous question around, how to figure out if emails are legit or not, this type of training is geared towards that. So it'll show you, the common methods that cyber criminals are using to kind of, trick staff members and that sort of thing. All right. So although the likelihood of falling victim to hacking is, less than phishing, we talked about how the severity is much higher. So we could potentially lose, all of our information at once due to, a major data breach or hack. So we should definitely be doing everything we can to ensure that this obviously doesn't happen, which can be done through things like, simple task lists to make sure that we have proper security measures in place. So some examples of this might be, enforcing strong password policies, reviewing things such as stale users to make sure that we don't have, users in our system that no longer work for us and they're just kept in there. Enabling things such as two-factor authentication, patching our systems regularly, making sure we don't have users that have, additional access beyond what their, job description requires them to do. Things like this really make a big impact, not only in the mitigation of hacking, but it also lessens the impact if something were to happen. Some more advanced system-related best practices that can protect against hacking include things like segmenting your network, so ensuring we have proper isolation between things like our Wi-Fi, corporate network, phone systems, things like that. This is really where Happier IT can come in and provide some guidance on how to do that kind of stuff. And then for organizations for over about 30 users, we would strongly recommend at least thinking about a dedicated security solution, such as managed detection and response, which is essentially a 24-hour security team that can provide insight on, if your systems might be getting exploited before that actually happens. All right, so let's talk a little bit about spyware and then some of the other malware that I had talked about, like the zombie malware. So we know that regular antivirus isn't enough to catch these type of threats. So we do want to try and look at more specific solutions. So the two common solutions are DNS filtering, which can give us information on if a machine has spyware, because often it'll contact an offsite source and we can see that data being transferred or attempting to be transferred. The second most common is, a specific spyware or malware add-on for your antivirus. So what this technology will do, and I talked a little bit about this in a past slide, but essentially it'll try and look at the behavior of what's happening on that device using things like machine learning and AI so that we can protect against some of these things that fly under the radar from regular antivirus. All right, now perhaps the most important slide that I'll be sharing today is how to protect against ransomware. Now, this is definitely compounded with user education and all of the kind of other things that I had mentioned. But if you remember correctly, one of the ways to get ransomware in the first place is through phishing. However, knowing that sometimes our staff are going to get phished potentially, and that might pose a threat to our organization, the best solution that we can offer at the moment is a ransomware specific technology that sits on each device. So this technology will help mitigate as well as isolate any devices that come in contact with ransomware. So essentially it'll stop it before it starts encrypting files, and it'll create a barrier around that device so that it can't contact other devices and infect other machines within the network, which is very critical for defending against ransomware. So the solution that I'm talking about or that we're proposing is through a provider called SentinelOne, who also provides a $1 million ransomware warranty when using their solution. So I would definitely encourage everyone to kind of talk more about this in depth in maybe a one-on-one discussion with your VCIO after the webinar. All right, let's talk a little bit about recovery. Now, I mentioned that there are some threats out there that are becoming more sophisticated and can delete or corrupt your backups, which obviously is a bad thing, and that would leave us with little or few options other than just paying a ransom. So we work with a disaster recovery provider that specifically prevents data from being tampered with, which is very critical. I won't go into too much detail on this. We do have another webinar geared specifically towards this solution coming up, I believe in a few months. But I thought I'd mention it as, backups are still a very critical piece of our overall cybersecurity strategy. All right. Well, that concludes things for our presentation. I'll send you guys back to Chris. We do have, I see in here, a few questions that you guys have asked throughout the presentation. So we'll do our best to kind of get through them all and answer as many as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. So like you said, a few questions have come through. We do have one from Tej Paul, and it's actually a really good question because it's something that you and I get all the time. And that is, how effective is Microsoft anti-threat protection?
Yeah, so Microsoft ATP is actually quite good. It's by no means a solution that you guys should be using as an end-all be-all type solution. We still want to see things like user education, because although ATP is very good at mitigating things like threats related to email attachments, you can still have cases where users are getting tricked and clicking into links and then typing in their credentials and getting their credentials harvested that way. So yeah, it is a really good solution. I would recommend it. It's not very costly. So definitely it is a good layer of security, but I would recommend other measures as well on top of that.
Excellent. So a question from Ben then. When should we be using two-factor, and what does two-factor do for you?
Yeah, so good question. We should be using two-factor as much as possible. The most common application for this is with emails. So for example, a lot of our clients and a lot of organizations out there use Office 365. So essentially, by default, you guys have things like, your Outlook web app. So you can access email anywhere, in the world, essentially. Although that's a powerful tool for productivity, that poses a lot of threats because now, anybody can log into your account. So we definitely want to implement two-factor in that application where we're restricting users who might be logging in remotely and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Another question. This one's from Nicholas. If we have email security in our organization, why do we need to educate our users on phishing? Shouldn't threats be blocked?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that, but essentially what a solution like ATP or email security is going to give you is a base level of security so that if a user makes a mistake, there's some protection in place so that you guys don't get malware on your machines, that sort of thing. But there are still cases where that malware is going to get through, or a user is going to get tricked, like I said, into going to a website that might look like one of your vendor's websites or like a Microsoft website, and then they type in their credentials. There's no kind of solution that's going to save you from that. Your credentials are going to get harvested. That somebody malicious is going to have that, and then they're going to get into your system, start moving laterally, that sort of thing. And yeah.
Cool. And then one final question here. This one's from Dominic. How can I understand how at risk my organization is from a cyber attack?
Yeah, good question. So as I mentioned, I think one of the, a good way to figure that out is to have a one-on-one chat with us and have us review a scorecard with you or a security scorecard. So that's something new that we're going to be doing. As I mentioned, anyone of our clients that joined this webinar, we're going to be reaching out to you guys with your security scorecard and reviewing it so that we can, understand things like where you guys might be most at risk. And then we can talk about, some of the things that we can do to help you guys.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. So I think we've come to the end of our presentation then. There isn't any more questions unless someone wants to get one in right now. Okay, here's a good one, actually. One just came in, Marcus. Is cybersecurity insurance more important than cybersecurity apps?
I would say that they're both important. Cyber insurance is definitely something that is still maturing. So, there are a lot of caveats to using a lot of the cyber insurance providers out there. But definitely, I wouldn't buy cyber insurance and not have cybersecurity applications and vice versa. You definitely need both if you were exploring that option.
Awesome. We just have a few more folks trying to type in a question here, so I'll just give it a few seconds. So just a question from me then, I think, Marcus.
Yep.
Every company, they have an IT budget. We work closely with our clients so that we can, so they're protected throughout the year. Their devices are upgraded and warranted. How much should a small business be spending on cybersecurity? How much should a business in general be spending on it?
That's a good question. It's a little bit hard to answer, just because we have clients there's organizations out there with different levels of revenue, that sort of thing, and how much they're able to actually delegate or spend on cybersecurity. I think that one of the answers to that is definitely more than they're spending now. We're just not seeing a whole lot of investment in cybersecurity, and it is going to catch up to you guys. Definitely at least get educated on, what solutions would fit good for your company, how much they cost, and then you guys should, ultimately make the decision on if you guys want to purchase something or that sort of thing. But I would say definitely figure out the numbers and then go from there.
Excellent. Tejpal has another question for us that it's a good one. what is a good tool for domain spoof prevention?
So if we're talking about like email domain spoofing, definitely there are email security platforms out there that can do that. ATP is an example of something that has the potential to do that. There are some other ones more specifically geared towards domain spoofing. That's all stuff that we could discuss and go through those solutions individually to see what might fit best for you guys in your organization.
And I would assume, Marcus, that's also the same kind of answer for a ransomware attack as well. Like, what is the best tool to use to mitigate it, as well as, a backup disaster recovery for.
Yeah, I mean, definitely ransomware is a beast. Like, we definitely need to have different layers of security to protect against it. As I mentioned in this webinar, I think our number one recommendation right now, to strictly prohibit ransomware from damaging any of your organizations, is the SentinelOne option. It also gives you guys that warranty. So if anything did happen within your organization and you're using SentinelOne on the device that was exploited, they have a $1 million payout that you guys can tap into. So that's something that is a bit unique for them or within the security space. So
awesome.
A strong option there.
Great. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. So we just have a few more questions coming in here, Marcus. One from Will, would going to the cloud, such as Microsoft 365, relieve us from worrying about backups? Doesn't Microsoft have their own backups? Why would we need something like, say, Backupify?
Yeah. So by default, Microsoft doesn't have strong backups. They'll keep your data for around 30 days, but it's not actually a means of recovery. You're definitely supposed to be purchasing third-party solutions that back up your Office 365 data. So, for example, you did mention Backupify is a really good option there. On both the OneDrive and the Exchange data.
Excellent. And it looks like Aaron has one more question here. So many users have a hard time making any sense of if a URL's valid or not. What kind of suggestions do you have for basic skills training?
Yeah, it can definitely be hard to determine if an email is legit or not. I would say that the security training that we're now launching with one of our newer security partners, it's really good. So it definitely has, a lot of video tutorials, and it's definitely geared more towards a user that isn't familiar with trying to figure this stuff out. So I'm confident that users are going to be able to understand how these things work after they're gone through their training period.
Great. We'll just wait a few more seconds. I think I see some other questions coming in. Yeah, one from Peter. IDS external versus IDS internal. Which one is better? Does it catch malware?
Yeah, I would say that, both are definitely important. In terms of which one's better, they're used for different applications. They could potentially catch malware, but there's a lot of other stuff that an IDS is going to do for you. There's a lot to that question, or a lot, definitely a difficult answer there. Peter, maybe you want to message me after the webinar and we can go through a more specific scenario on where this might be applied, that sort of thing.
Okay. So yeah, that looks like that's it for the questions.
I see Diana here will the presentation or recording be sent to them? Yeah, we're going to be sending the recording to everyone. So you'll all get a copy of I believe it's YouTube is where we post it.
Yep, absolutely. So as Marcus mentioned, we'll be sending out a link to the webinar by email. We will also include our client security scorecard and a link to book a meeting with your VCIO to further discuss your IT security. Aaron, did you have another one coming? I see another question coming here real quick.
No, maybe not.
No, maybe not.
Awesome.
All right. No worries, Aaron. Thanks. So yeah, I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but this is extremely important information for everyone to consider. Thank you for your time. We look forward to seeing you all in the next webinar. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.